Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. My name is Farai Dondo. This is my third presentation on the Kazakhstan Watch. So, as I said in my last presentation, today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Green Energy Initiative within Kazakhstan. And if you remember, some of the key points that I pointed out was the fact that most of the energy within this country comes from coal and or oil and natural gas products, mostly fossil fuels. It is a large part of their economy, and they're also a net exporter of oil as well as coal. So before I get into the Green Energy Initiative, I'm going to go back into a little bit of history of this country and emissions. So in 1992, they actually had the 14th highest level of industrial carbon dioxide emissions, which totaled about 297.9 million metric tons. And to give you a snapshot, just 10 years from then, in 2012, they emitted about 224 million and TCOS2e, that's just a measure of tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. That's what those letters and characters stand for. And it was about 6% of the EU's greenhouse gas outputs. And also, in other terms, to give you a better picture, it was actually the largest in the world per capita of GDP. Within those 10 years, the greenhouse gas emissions climbed about 81%. So, how did this initiative start? The first thing is there was a need. There was a lot of pressure from different organizations around the world. Uh, Kazakhstan being an independent country, they were looking to trade with other countries, trade with the EU and other Asian countries. So the president, President Nursultan Nazarbayev, unveiled his strategy to moderate oil and gas rich economy, an oil and gas rich economy back in 2012. And then he also at the same time he coined the term the green economy. And since then, the country and the government has invested billions of dollars into green energy. So what was the plan? So the plan involved wind turbines, solar power plants, and also it included hydroelectric energy. And some of these images are to give you an idea of they invested over $1 billion from 2013 to 2015, and it just gives you an idea of the size and the enormity of that investment that the government made. So is the plan really working? So this initiative, which also incorporated legislation, which we'll talk about in the next slide, was part of the action plan for development of alternative and renewable energy. The time frame they set was from 2013 to 2020, and that was a long-term goal. And they had certain measurements put in place. And one of the goals was to reach a production of 1 billion kilowatt hour by 2016. However, by 2015, they were only at 245.7, which was just under 25%. As I mentioned before, some of the sources of energy that they were using was hydroelectric power, wind turbines, solar power plants, and as well as biogas. What's interesting is that within this initiative, Kazakhstan actually became a leader amongst Asian countries because of the energy reform and efficiency legislation that was passed and efforts of which began in 2012. um, they established um, an emissions trade system, which was actually, which the standard that they used was actually a framework which was set by the EU, And basically, what happens is the market actually aids the country in achieving its goal of reducing greenhouse emissions. And I do apologize, my presentation is a little bit wordy. However, there's a little bit of information to cover and a lot of technical terms, and I thought I would lay it out all for you here. And so I've got a bit of a description here of what the emissions trade framework of the EU, what it consists of, and kind of a definition of what it is to paint a picture of so that you get a better understanding of what it is. So in summary, what happens is a cap is set on the total amount of greenhouse gases that can be emitted from a specific operation. That could be from a manufacturing or production company. So this cap that's set is gradually reduced over time and thereby reducing total emissions. And within this cap, companies receive and buy emission allowances, and they can also trade with each other as needed. International credits can also be purchased from projects that are below the cap around the world. So the idea was, of course, to promote trade within the EU, and as this emissions trade system actually allowed them to trade, companies to trade not only within Kazakhstan, but throughout the European Union. And that was the whole idea behind using this EU framework is they will be allowed to trade beyond their borders. Um, and also, so international credits could be purchased from projects that were below the cap from around the world. And heavy fines were imposed on companies that do not surrender enough allowances to cover these emissions. So then that reduced that the companies were not limited to trading with companies within the country alone, but also within the EU. And because the standards were, they were using this EU framework that did allow them to meet the criteria that was set by the EU. Through this initiative, Kazakhstan actually became a leader amongst Asian countries. And in 2013, they actually became the first Asian country to implement economy-wide ETS legislation and system. And soon after that, in 2015, Korea followed suit. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you for taking the time to listen. And for my next presentation, I'm going to be looking at a summary of the key policy features. And this is this green energy initiative and the legislation and some of the specific features of the legislation as well as the policy. Thank you.